Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining us online for tonight's event with Brown Girl Magazine and the Asian American Writers Workshop, celebrating Brown Girl Magazine's first print anthology, Untold, Defining Moments of the Uprooted. You can find a link to purchase the anthology in the Zoom chat, and we hope that you do so. My name is Lily Philpott. I'm the programs manager at the Asian American Writers Workshop, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our virtual event space. Please let us know in the chat where you are watching from. I am speaking to you all from Brooklyn, New York, which is on ancestral and unceded Canarsie and Munsee Lenape land. For those of you who are new to the AAWW, we are a nonprofit organization dedicated to uplifting Asian diasporic literature and storytelling. At a time when these communities are specifically vulnerable, we continue to offer a space in which we can imagine a more just future. I want to thank the team at Brown Girl Magazine and all of our speakers tonight for their partnership. You will hear more from them shortly. Tonight, our run of show is a conversation with anthology editors Kamini Ramdeen and Gabrielle Diona, followed by readings and conversation with contributors Anita Wadwani, Julie Lalwani, and Nupur Chaudhury. After that, we hope you'll stay online as we welcome food blogger Khushboo Patel for a virtual after party and cooking demonstration. During this event, we ask that all audience members practice nonviolence in the chat. Comments that are racist, transphobic, homophobic, ableist, and/or misogynist will be flagged and the person will be removed from this event. If you have questions for our authors, editors, or chef throughout this event, please add them to the Q&A function on Zoom. I am going to briefly introduce Kamini and Gabrielle, and then we'll be back to introduce our contributors after their conversation. Kamini Ramdeen is a Guyanese American editor, graphic design artist, photographer, and small business owner based in New York City. She previously managed editorial teams at Brown Girl Magazine, where she led political and Indo-Caribbean coverage. Now she is a senior editor at The Skimm, leading news coverage on theskimm.com. She also designs streetwear apparel for her brand Paulo Grand, where she seeks to create awareness and spark conversations about the first generation American identity. Gabrielle Diona is a Guyanese American writer and editor based in New York City. First published at age 16, she has penned personal essays on her experiences navigating the world as a Muslim teenager for virtualmosque.com and Sisters magazine. She went on to work for mission-based organizations, including Global Citizen and Girl Scouts of the USA. She also served as an assistant editor for the Indo-Caribbean and political teams at Brown Girl Magazine. She hopes to continue to give a voice to those without a platform and to provide authentic representation of minorities and marginalized communities through storytelling. Please do join me in welcoming Kamini and Gabrielle on screen. First of all, thank you so much for joining us. We are so thrilled, and I'd love to hear you both speak about how the anthology came about.
Gabby, I think that you should kick it off with this one.
Sure. I think that's apt because I was the first one to sign on to the project. So the backstory to Untold is that there was already an anthology in the works at Brown Girl, and the editor that was working on that project had left, and Trisha, our CEO at Brown Girl Magazine, was looking for somebody to take over the project. And so I had just graduated from college, was looking for my first full-time job, and this seemed like a great way to combine my passions for creating representation, reading books, and of course writing, by taking on this project. And so we actually just decided to start brand new and to curate stories very intentionally that were diverse, that were from different parts of the diaspora, and that took our storytelling to new heights at Brown Girl Mag.
Yeah, piggybacking off of everything that Gabby just said, after Gabby had signed on to the project, it was just total circumstance. Like, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, I think. But Gabby was talking about the project and where she was in it. And I was like, oh, wait, I'm interested in this. Like, I would love to come on board and help in any way possible. And that's how we just started to collaborate. Gabby and I have like a longer existing working relationship. We worked on the same teams at Brown Girl Magazine. So like, it was just an easy flow between the two of us, but we had a very, very defined and concrete definition or message that we wanted to create with Untold. And I feel like so much of it is from that day of just being in the right place in the right time, but it all started with that, just an idea.
And I'm interested to hear, so we have 3 contributors online tonight, but there are 31 total in the anthology, which is absolutely amazing. So many incredible voices. I'm interested to hear what that process looked like of actually selecting the pieces that went into the magazine, sorry, the anthology. What really stood out to you? Did you propose pieces from people? Like, how did you find the writers that you included?
So we actually did not propose stories to begin with. And I'll let Gabby talk a little bit more about the initial processes of it. But we had put out a call for pitches on Brown Girl Magazine's platforms, social and on the web. And we were really fortunate to get over 150 responses to that call. Sifting through them and deciding which story to take and which stories we felt we could leave out for either a feature on the website itself or a placement someplace else. Now that was a lot trickier. Gabby, you can weigh in there.
Yeah, so it was 150 pitches, and we also did want to salvage some of the stories from the original anthology. So that was a whole process in itself to kind of go through those stories and see, like, is this a personal essay or is this an experience, whatever they were writing about, that could translate into this new anthology? And so that was its own kind of curation process. And then the curation process of the other stories that came from the calls for pitches was Kamini and I at a local coffee shop, like 4 times within like 1 month, just reading through them. And it was really interesting I think for us to see these stories from, you know, the 1 paragraph that they submitted as a pitch, which is very difficult to tell a story in that way, to the full-fledged stories that are now in Untold today. So it was a lengthy process, lots of rounds of editing. We are very thankful to all of the writers for bearing with us through that process and trusting us that we were doing our best to help them tell their stories in an authentic way. But yeah, so that's a little bit of what the process was like.
Yeah, and to add on one more thing, you know, going through the pitches, the breadth of the South Asian diaspora was really in front of us. We were looking at so many different segments of what comprises that South Asian diaspora. We were fortunate enough to get stories from people who are living in Europe right now, who are living in the UK, who are living in, Europe is obviously a part of the UK, from Denmark, from the UK, from Canada, and from the US. So there were so many different angles and points of view to choose from. And in curating it, it was just making sure that, you know, we weren't repeating anything that was already stated, that we were really covering more than just the regular, like, this is the love and romantic relationship from only that aspect, but really talking about the things that are untold. Like, what are the things that we are not talking to each other about? And that really helped guide the stories that you see in the anthology today.
Amazing. I'm really interested to hear about your editorial process as well, especially because there are 2 of you. I'd love to just hear a little bit about like what that behind the scenes looked like. How did you, I mean, you mentioned you went into a coffee shop and sort of hashed it out, but like, what did that process look like? What did that partnership look like?
Well, during the pandemic, me and Gabby we both have full-time jobs. So we would jump on a call very similar to this, except it would be just the 2 of us. And I think we'd work for 8 hours during the day at our full-time job and then work 8 hours into the wee parts of the night, editing stories. We edited every single story together. Every word we talked about out loud together. We read the stories back and forth to each other. We spent countless hours on every single one of them. There were times where I was like delirious, like having to do squats to like stay awake so that we could hit our deadlines to make it. But Gabby, I'd love to know that from your point of view too.
Yeah, no, our point of view is exactly the same, because I feel like we've talked about it so many times together. And it's fun to kind of reminisce what those nights were like. It's so funny because during that period of time, it's like, okay, like it's been nights and nights of like not going to sleep at 3 a.m. and waking up super early for work. And then I think there was a period of time where like a week went by and we're like, we kind of miss it. We kind of miss those late night chats and working together creatively in that way. But yeah, I think it really ramped up. It was the editing process after we accepted the pitches. We had accepted, I think, like 80 of them in the beginning. And we whittled that down to 31 through the editorial process. And so it was rounds of edits where we would give feedback and we would see which stories would kind of rise to the occasion. And that doesn't mean that they were perfect in that first edit, but that we were seeing those elements that we were looking for, that they could grasp the creative nonfiction, what makes a creative nonfiction story. And then sometimes when it came to stories that were about the same topic, which one was kind of told in, or was just more developed, and we could see it developing into something that readers could really resonate with. But one of the things that we're very clear about, as well, there's so much diversity in Untold, is that these experiences are still the unique experiences of the people who wrote about them. And it's, 31 perspectives on the South Asian diasporic experience, but it is not the 360-degree view of it. So there are so many more stories to tell, and that's something else that we've tried to be very clear about. But yeah, the editing process was fun. It was funny because at the start of the pandemic, when we all thought that we were going back to work, it was like, oh my God, it's obviously not great because people were getting sick, but we're home, our schedules finally align. It's going to be 2 weeks. We're going to get this done and we're going to go back to work. It's going to be great. So, it's like a year and a half later and we're now still interacting this way.
On Zoom.
But
I'm so interested as well, sort of as editorial partners. I was really fascinated and excited to see that both of you are Guyanese American. And I'm interested to hear just like, do you think that kind of cultural influence had an influence or helped shape the anthology at all, or your editorial style? And maybe it didn't, but I was curious about that.
I do think that being Guyanese American is an identity that just never gets talked about enough at all. And especially within the South Asian diaspora, coming from a West Indian community, sometimes there's not that cohesiveness of like, we have our stake in the South Asian diaspora too. So being two Guyanese American editors and, being kind of the shepherds of all of these stories, I think it does create that mark. And I hope it creates some inspiration for others. And that's kind of the tone that being Guyanese American sets for me with Untold. I hope that people know, regardless if you're Guyanese, West Indian, a part of the larger South Asian diaspora, but we're also part of it, that you can do this, that this is something you can do. And that's editorially, I would say that the stance and that mission for myself made all of it sort of more meaningful for myself. But did it guide like the editorial part of the book? That I think is more like intuition, creativity, but also like being a part of this diaspora, I think the point that I want to make is that even if being Guyanese American, I still saw so much of myself in every single story. And I think like that was so powerful for me to see, and something that was really like cohesive.
I love that.
I think one of the, I remember we made like a book list in Vogue, like a recommended reading list. And I remember one of the conversations we had in celebration of that was like, we're two Guyanese American women in Vogue creating representation for the South Asian community and the diasporic community. And I think one of the interesting things for us as well is West Indians or Indo-Caribbeans in the diaspora don't have a lot of representation. I think, having an Indo-Caribbean vertical like we do at Brown Girl Magazine is very unique. So for us to be at the head of this, new venture, creating representation for everyone was very special to us. And we were very, it's definitely very meaningful. And I think if there's one thing that it informed in the editorial process is making sure that we wanted everybody's voice to be heard, their unique experiences, and really wanting to create that representation. If there is not representation for a particular community, making sure certain themes were represented, or certain groups were represented. If a story was available to us, we wanted to take it if it could add to that beautiful rainbow of South Asian diasporic voices.
Yeah, I do really feel like, and I mean, your background, but this anthology itself feels so groundbreaking in so many ways. And it is so, I mean, it's super exciting that it's been in Vogue, it's a print anthology. I think that's amazing. I have so many more questions, and I know we're running out of time a little bit because we want to hear from the anthology contributors as well. I do want to say, if the audience has any questions, please do submit them via the Q&A function. I will ask them. One last question that I have for both of you that I always like to ask is sort of, where do you see this anthology? Which books do you see this anthology sitting beside in a bookstore? If it was on a recommended shelf, what would the books on that shelf be? Untold plus.
Oh, that's such a great question. I hope Little Fires Everywhere would be on that shelf, or Everything I've Never Told You. I hope that Midnight's Children would be on that shelf as well. I don't know. I hope that it would be on a shelf of stories that really made people look at things in a different light. Not that the stories had to be so over the top, maybe not so Salman Rushdie, Midnight's Children with the fable and the sort of overlay, but a stories that are simple in nature, but it spark a light.
I love that.
Yeah, I don't think there's a few particular books coming to mind, but I think when I envision Untold, one of the amazing things is the growth of the South Asian diasporic literature. It's just everywhere, and every time I open Instagram, somebody else is publishing, another South Asian American or person from the diaspora is publishing a children's book, or a fiction romance adult book. And so I think I just envision it sitting on a shelf or in a bookcase filled with stories written about and by, strong South Asian women and people that are representative of so many different experiences. And I envision it there just because I think it's so powerful that there's so much option now. And so Untold is a piece of that pie, and it would be amazing to see it next to any one of those books that are coming to my mind right now.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. I really do wish we were in person at the workshop, because our event space is lined with bookshelves all by Asian diasporic authors, and one day we will need to get a copy of Untold on those shelves. I think sadly we are out of time for this segment. I want to transition into hearing from our contributors so you all can hear how amazing the pieces in this anthology are. But thank you so much, Kamini and Gabby, for your work, for those late nights, all of the editing. I can't believe that it was 31 stories and that you both co-edited absolutely everything. It's amazing. Well, thank you both.
Thank you so much for having us. And before we leave, I just wanted to, well, not leave, we'll still be here, but before I turn my camera off, I just wanted to take a moment right before we hear from our other contributors to acknowledge one of our other contributors, Anantha Sudakar. She wrote one of our stories called The Tale of Two, and it was co-written with her best friend, and the two of them were diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer before the age of 40. Anantha was a professor at San Francisco University. She actually worked at AAWW, I think back in the 90s. Her friend was telling us. And so earlier this month, sadly, Anantha passed away. And we just wanted to take this time to remember her and honor her and her contributions to the academic and literary community. I'm going to drop a few links in the chat as soon as we hop off. So if you guys are interested, please do read about her. And I also believe they started a scholarship fund in her name. So if you are moved to contribute, please do. So thank you so much for just letting me get that in.
Yeah, thank you, Gabby, for that. It feels really good to call her name into this space too. We are grateful for that. Thank you both. I am going to call up our first contributor to read. Just give me one moment to get myself settled. We are going to start with a reading from Anita Wadwani. I'm going to introduce her and then we'll hop off screen so Anita can read. Anita Wadwani received her master's in public and international affairs from the University of Pittsburgh and her bachelor's in journalism and mass communications from Point Park College, both in Pittsburgh. During her graduate studies, she was an intern at the Department of State and has since continued to work in the policy and government field on national security issues within Washington, D.C. She is the recipient of several awards, including the Joint Civilian Service Commendation Award and the Global War on Terrorism Medal. Anita has also previously advocated for mental health awareness and elderly care in the South Asian American community due to her experience as a caregiver. In 2018, she was named a 40 under 40 leader within the Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C. area. And in her free time, she continues to pursue writing as a form of expression. Please welcome Anita to read her.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm going to be reading my story, an excerpt from my story entitled Motherly Instincts. So here we go. In the car, I flashed back to 6 years ago, and I finally understood why my dad became so short-tempered and frazzled. I fondly remembered the last few weeks of his life, when he and my mom came to visit me at my new condo in Virginia. At 70, he was a far cry from his active skier, tennis player, skinny days, but he still looked like a man who was at least 10 years younger. The only sign of his real age was probably the complete loss of his thick, dark locks that he was known for back in the 60s. He and my mother were in their 34th year of marriage. Life had dealt them numerous challenges during that time, but they had gotten through all of them together. Things seem like they're getting worse, I said to my dad when we returned to Alexandria from a museum outing in DC. This is why I didn't tell you right away, he responded, sounding exasperated. Look, I'm managing. Things are going fine. There's no need to get worked up. Dad, you can't tell me that she got lost in our own neighborhood and not expect me to be worried. When was this? And how could she not know our address? You know that means it's getting worse. I need to do more to help. Tell me what I should do, I pleaded. He paused for a few moments, looked at me, and then put his arm around me. Everything you're doing and have done is very good. We're always proud of you. Mom is so happy when you come home. What, once, twice a month? I know that's a lot. This is all we need, Anu. And I know you can't come home all the time, so please don't worry. You know, I'll always tell you if I need something, right? He said, trying to reassure me. I thought about this conversation often. He frequently tried to comfort me during difficult times, and thinking about his selflessness still made my eyes well up with tears. Those were the words I needed to hear. While my work trips, romantic life, and social commitments kept me busy in DC, my parents continued their usual routine, which was frequently complicated by my mom's growing memory loss and mental decline. We headed into the grocery store and I grabbed a cart. My mom was excited to be doing something on her own, to feel independent and useful. She was smiling again. Her smile has a way of warming you up inside. People are drawn to her when she's at her best. I consulted her about which fruits and vegetables we would buy, doing my best to make her feel needed. I actually never realized how important all this was, especially trying to keep her mind busy so that she stays alert. It's one of the many things I've learned over these past 6 years. She placed the produce in our cart, then picked up more items that we already had at home: tea bags, salt, and whatever else caught her eye. While she wandered off to pick more things, I hurried to take them out of the cart and place them out of her gaze. She caught me in the act. As I placed a bottle of ranch dressing back on the shelf, she began to whine, her voice growing louder and louder. "What are you doing?" she shouted. My patience started to wear thin. Then my adult voice came out. "That's enough. I told you many times we have bottles of this at home. Finish those first," I said sternly. I knew people were looking, but at this point, I was used to having a few stares. I couldn't afford to spend $100 during every grocery trip we went on. But she tossed a bag of chips, a wooden spoon, and paper plates into the cart anyway. "I want these," she demanded. At that moment, I gave up being so cheap. I knew this was really about her wanting to have some control. "Fine, are we ready to go now?" I asked, returning to my normal tone. She nodded, triumphant. I exhaled again once we finally left. By the time evening rolled around, my mom's aide finally arrived. "Thank goodness you're here, Fatima," I warmly greeted her as she came in. Fatima just smiled, taking off her coat and shoes by the front entry closet. I know you're ready to get out of here," she laughed. "How is she today?" "All over the place, but I think she's finally calmed down. She wants aloo paratha for dinner, and we still have some sabzi in the fridge," I told her as if I was talking to a babysitter. "Oh, and make sure she takes her medicine tonight. Her sugar has been getting high the last couple of days. You know she can't control her bladder overnight when she gets like that." 30 minutes later, I rushed down the steps wearing my black dress and leopard print heels, digging through my purse for the new lipstick I had just bought. Mom stared at me from the couch, inspecting my night out look. "Going to meet your friends? You should wear your red dress," she said, knowing my weekend routine. "I'll wear it next time. You want to come with me?" I laughed, taking her hands into mine and waving in the air playfully. "No, I'm tired. You go. But tell them I said hi," she said seriously. "Make sure you take your medicine tonight, okay?" "Okay," she said, sipping her chai. These light exchanges are what makes the house we live in feel like home, whether I return 1 in the morning on a Saturday night or 6 p.m. during the work week. I know I'm not coming to a lonely, empty place. My mom's inquiries about my eating habits, her outfit recommendations, her eyes lighting up when I walk through the door. These moments never get old for me, no matter how many tantrums she throws. And that's it for my excerpt. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anita. We will chat with Anita and our other contributors shortly, but for the moment, I am going to call Nupur onto screen, and we'll introduce her quickly as well. Nupur Chaudhury is a public health urbanist who looks at cities, communities, communities, and connections through a grassroots lens. She has developed and implemented strategies to support residents, communities, and neighborhoods, and challenge power structures to build just, strong, and equitable cities. Her work spans the nonprofit, philanthropic, and governmental systems, and has been featured in the American Journal of Public Health, City Lab, National Public Radio, and the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. She is also a core organizer and faculty of Dark Matter University, a university that seeks to create new forms of knowledge and knowledge production through radical anti-racist forms of teaching. As a writer, Nupur uses her pen to explore issues of identity and belonging and believes that writing is a path to shared liberation. She is a mentor for girls right now. And please join me in welcoming Nupur.
Thanks so much, Lily. So I'm going to read an excerpt from my piece entitled Enough. I walk through the doors of my pottery studio and I take a deep sigh of relief. I change out of my work clothes and into my studio sweats. I turn off my phone and pull my long reddish black hair out of my face. I select my pottery wheel for the night, lay down my tools, and get to work, pulling out large chunks of clay from the communal pot and kneading the air bubbles out of them, shaping them slowly into small, dense balls of clay to be thrown on the wheel later. I wipe down my station and bring my chosen clay to my wheel. I begin the gentle process of attaching the clay to the wheel, and when fully fused, gently start to manipulate the clay. Excuse me, moving it from a ball to a cylinder, and with the curve of my hand into a bowl. I lubricate the clay with water and gentle sponging as I work. And I begin to focus on our instructor as he takes the wheel and begins the demonstration, as he does with every class. As he begins to shape the structure of the vase, he mentions techniques from other cultures. He tells us about Kinsugi, which literally translates to golden repair. Based in Japan for centuries, it is the art of fixing broken pottery with powdered gold, giving the appearance of a piece with veins of gold, and celebrating every fracture and break rather than hiding them. As he explains his technique, I think of my own body and what would it mean for bodies like mine, bodies that are broken to be revered, like Japanese pottery. My mind wanders to thinking about the story that my mother tells me from time to time. The story of how when I was born, my hip was completely dislocated. The dislocation was so severe that hours after the doctors pulled me out of my mother's womb, under her clear direction, she's an OBGYN and actually demanded that a mirror be installed on the ceiling of the operating room so she could see exactly what was going on. They then placed me in a body cast from the waist down for my first year of life. My mother's focus on my body did not end in that hospital room. In both of my parents' eyes, I was born broken, and fixing me would become their lifelong task. That initial interaction with my parents, born broken from my mother's womb, instilled a hyper-vigilant relationship between us, one in which my parents constantly looked for things that were wrong with me, things that they needed to fix. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nupur. That was beautiful. I'm going to call up our final contributor to read, and then we will all hop back on screen for a quick conversation. Please join me in welcoming Julie Lalwani. And I am going to briefly introduce Julie, and then we will hear her read. Julie Lalwani is a Harvard-trained stockbroker currently residing in Arizona. In her spare time, she runs half marathons, tells stories, and serves as a board member for Women's Empowerment Foundation, an Asian women's empowerment volunteer network. Thank you so much for being here, Julie. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Lily. Hi, everybody. So my story is called Terror and Redemption in Trump Country. So in 2016, when an unnaturally orange 70-year-old man with a bad comb over and an even poorer disposition became the Republican nominee for president, I was horrified, but I didn't believe he would win. His rhetoric was so divisive, I could not imagine anyone agreeing with him, or at least admitting that they agreed with him. And it was with that naivete that I began my new job in the heart of what I soon discovered was Trump country. June in Phoenix, Arizona is a scorcher. You can burn your hands just by buckling your seatbelt, left hot from the roasting desert sun. And the air conditioner, that never turns on fast enough. As I walked into my office, the air hung in my lungs like a gargoyle clinging to a Gothic rooftop. I glided into the cool oasis of the lobby where the two of my newest clients were waiting for me. The wife was wearing beige capris and a yellow blouse. Gauche baubles of jade and yellow gold hung from her neck and ears. She was plain, but carried herself with an unmistakable air of haughtiness. Her husband was dressed unremarkably, but had a weathered leather Bible resting on his lap. Unusual for a meeting with your stockbroker, I thought to myself, but you get all kinds. I welcomed them into my conference room, and after a bit of small talk, we went over their portfolio. My assistant, Jane, round-faced and cheerful, brought them their iced tea and shut the door. So our previous financial advisor went to our church. Did you know that? Are you a believer? The wife asked, her loud staccato voice, similar to the plucking of a broken violin, echoed in the office. Did he? Oh, how nice for you. What church? I replied. Do you believe? She interjected. Believe in Jesus. Is that relevant? Well, our church talks a lot about Muslims and how they're out to destroy Christians. Their Quran mandates that they kill all Christians so they can join Muhammad, she said matter-of-factly. Okay, well, you know, I'm here to help you with your finances. So if you don't think this is the right fit, well, will you read the Bible with us? The husband interrupted. What? No, I said aghast, standing up to usher them to the door. It was at that moment the wife lunged at me and spat, her saliva splattering across my face and neck. Trump sees you for what you are. You are an evil terrorist who plots against us, but we will prevail. He will win. You need to go back to where you came from. God bless America, she screamed. Jane, call the police, I said quickly to my assistant as I looked for a napkin. I went to the bathroom and my belly was filled with shame. I listened to the banal conversation of other women while I stood alone, waiting for my turn to wipe the client's hate off my face. Finally, I got to a stall and cried silently. Well, what was I crying about, I thought? Losing another client because of the color of my skin? No, not that, not really. Was I crying because she spat on me? Partly. But there was something else though, something far more upsetting. My makeup was smeared and I splashed my face with cold water, hoping I could wash this feeling off of me. As I wiped my face clean, I looked in the mirror. I saw someone I did not recognize looking back at me. She was Indian, brown-skinned, dark eyes. She was me, but I didn't know her. That's it.
Thank you so much, Julie. I am just going to call Nupur and Anita back on screen. And please do give our contributors a round of applause in the chat for their beautiful work. Thank you all for sharing. Anita, there you are. Amazing. Thank you. We have just a little bit of time. Again, to the audience, if you have questions for our writers, please do add them in the Q&A box and I will ask them. But I have so many questions of my own that I would love to ask you. I want to start, this anthology calls for defining moments. And I'd love to just hear what the thought process was like, what the decision process was like, and how you each came up with the moment that you ended up writing about in your piece in this anthology. Let anyone jump in.
Go first. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Anita. No, go ahead.
Okay, sure. I think for me, it was really about telling a story that I didn't see anywhere, especially for females in their 30s, being a full-time caregiver. Typically you see, you know, married couple in their 40s, 50s, you know, taking in grandma or something, and you know, their parents and they have kids, and there's a whole support system around that. So this was something I was grappling with. None of my friends were dealing with it, and adding the element of being South Asian had a lot of other layers and complexity as far as finding the appropriate care for my mom, and also thinking about what to do in terms of the long-term care. So in really trying to display the emotions of it, the various different complex layers of how it's a hard, it can be hard, but it can be rewarding at the same time. And the fact that she has dementia doesn't mean she's written off, which, you know, surprisingly enough, a lot of people do think that. It's like, oh, well, they kind of write that person off. And I wanted to showcase her in a way that didn't write her off, that she still has a personality, she's still there. So I think for me, it was really getting that out onto paper.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, for me, I have to say, I think sometimes I can be a little bit disappointing with these, you know, sort of big questions, but I think a lot of times good stories come from really unremarkable places. And it was a really unremarkable day, except for that particular moment. And I think for me, what's been the most, I suppose, like edifying part of this entire process was how a very ordinary moment that was painful for me has resonated with so many people, and it's given them like a sense of comfort that at the time I did not think there was anything good that could come out of it. So that's sort of how I feel the moment is important, because in and of itself, I'm not sure that it's something worth so much to be codified, let alone, published and put out for like public consumption. So, but that was my take on it.
Yeah, and for me, to be honest, I knew that I wanted to talk about my relationship with my body and my parents' relationship with my body. Actually, finding the moment was quite difficult for me, and I went through a couple of different iterations of different moments to kind of highlight. I knew that story about my body and kind of what that means in the South Asian culture was something that I wanted to put forth. But I think that kind of that underlying feeling, there were so many little moments that led to kind of my feeling of liberation from that kind of that relationship. And so it took a couple of drafts and it took a couple of hard moments of meditation to really think about like what's the piece that I do actually want to put out there and actually share with other folks.
That's actually leading me to my second question, which is, we heard, about the editorial process from Gabby and Kamini's side, but I'd love to hear from your side as well, like what that process was like. I mean, on a more practical level, I'm always interested in hearing how many drafts were there, what kind of like structural changes were made, but kind of on an emotional level, like what did it feel like to be handing these stories over to, editors and then to the wider public?
I'm happy to share. I think that like I'm always very grateful for Gabby because I think that when I had submitted my pitch, part of it, that the actual process of submitting it was a piece of the liberation for me. And I didn't think it was going to get selected. I didn't think I was actually going to write a whole piece. I kind of wanted to get this feeling and kind of this place that I was in, I wanted to be done with it. And so for me, writing about it and even having kind of that like limited pitch around it was a piece of that. And so when it started making its way through all of the drafts, I was actually quite resistant to it because I didn't want to keep on writing about it. But it was also that piece of slowly liberating myself from that really, really horrible relationship with my body. And I have to say that Gabby was very, very patient with me because of the fact that like it was a very, very emotional process. There were times that I really delayed kind of our meetings or kind of got the edits late because I just almost didn't even want to look at it. And so I'm very, very grateful to her for pushing me forward through the whole process.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I think for me, I've written a lot of nonfiction, but the creative nonfiction, and then obviously something so personal was also new to me. So the editors both Kamini and Gabrielle did such a great job of really explaining what does that mean, because when I went back and looked at my initial draft, I was like, oh my God, this was terrible. And they really did a lot of work to sort of make it into something that explaining to us, these are the elements that will help make this resonate with the readers, like add something more personal, something more descriptive. And so really be able to learn to how to showcase something creatively like that, that's a true story. That was a great learning experience for me. And yeah, it took quite a few drafts, I know, for myself, but it was still my voice. It was still everything that I really wanted to express. So now when I read it, I'm very proud of this work. And I don't think it would have been possible without Brown Girl and the editing process. So yeah, and it's sort of another skill set of, learning to write in such a different way. I've learned to write in so many different ways, and this kind of adds to that, which makes me want to do more work like this. So
Yeah, I just really quickly, for me, I have to say, I found the editing process incredibly humbling. I was not used to, I was not prepared for how many edits were necessary. So I think for me, it was like the writing the story didn't take very long, but editing it, that darn thing took months. And so I feel that it's really humbling, I think, more so than anything else. Like you have to really want to see it through, because otherwise, why put yourself through that, honestly?
I love that descriptor of humbling as sort of one for the editorial process. It is such a vulnerable moment. There's so much trust that has to be kind of held on each side, and I love that. I want to ask about your writing processes, and actually there's an audience question that I love that says, what advice do you have for writers who are still struggling to find their voice? And maybe this came out in initial drafts or maybe through the editorial process. How did you sort of find the voice that is in your piece?
Well, for me, I think it's difficult to say, like, again, I think it goes back to, I'm not really sure that my voice is the sort of thing that everybody needs to hear, but I do think that I think whenever you're guided by honesty, you are being guided by your voice. So, and yeah, and I don't remember what the other question was about the process, or I don't remember the other part of it.
You answered it mostly just how did you find the voice in your piece, your voice?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Julian in that piece of it that like I'm not really sure if I was the right person or the best person to talk about this issue of weight, body image, all of those pieces, and like, South Asian culture and their, like, the belief that female bodies are, owned by South Asian society, right? That was something that I really wanted to talk about. And I just didn't see anyone else really talking about it. And so I was like, well, I'm going to talk about it. And I don't know if my voice was the right voice, the best voice, if it was even kind of a fully formed or developed voice in the way that I think the person asked, but it was where I was in that moment to talk about it. And so for that, I will say that like it was in some ways it was good enough because it got that piece and that story and kind of that topic out there. And I think that I'm still trying to figure out what my voice is in my writing. This really encouraged me to think about writing about other pieces of my life and other topics and things like that. And I'm still trying to explore it, but it was important to me to get that out. And it just happened to be in my voice.
yeah, I would also say for me, it was really about just getting my particular story out. And as I mentioned before, it was not something I'd seen anywhere. A lot of folks in my circle have said, wow, you're doing great. You're doing so well. You should talk about this more. You should share about this. I did speak at a couple panels, sort of talking about this, my experience, but really trying to get that emotion out and trying to get these little bits that I tried to put in the story of my day-to-day life with mom and her story as well. I think that's what ended up capturing my voice, just as everyone else, that particular story, the personal story.
There's another audience question that again is sort of leading me in the direction I wanted to go in this conversation that says, did the idea for your stories come first, or did thinking more about the pitch inspire the idea? We've sort of talked around that a little bit, but I'm interested to hear, like, from pitch to story, actually, also, how much did your piece change?
I could start with that. I think for me, I started just kind of laying everything out, like, this is what happened. This is how this started. This is what that happened. And it was more like a very nonfiction, play by play. And it evolved into something a lot more descriptive, where somebody's really it's going to resonate with people who aren't caregivers, because there is a parent-child relationship that many of us have that everyone can relate to, or the South Asian or diaspora relationship, or there's so many different things that I think it evolved to that through the editing process and through really thinking about what do I want people to take away with. So for me, yeah, it completely changed from, I wouldn't say the pitch, but definitely from the first draft. I think the pitch really still was there. The pitch, if you look at the pitch now, I think it still is there. But I do think it definitely evolved into what it was.
I think if I think back to my pitch, I think my pitch was like, hey, Brown Girl Mag, like, this is what I want to talk about. And this is who I am. And like, this is why I want to talk about this. And so I think when they were like, okay, talk about it. Like, that's when I had to do the work of the story. And my first draft was one where I wrote it all like in its entirety, like in one sitting, because I think that I had been thinking about it for so long. And so definitely from the pitch to kind of that first draft, they were vastly different, because the draft was the actual story, whereas what I sent Brown Girl Mag was like, this is who I am, this is why I want to talk about it, and this is why I think it's important. And then I think that entire process that we talked about in terms of the editing and all of that was more of let's think about how this can be a story, how we can hone into specific moments and go beyond kind of the larger themes that I wanted to talk about around like shame around women's bodies and South Asian culture and how it perpetuates that into specifically you and why you're the person that's writing this. So it was, I think every draft was very, very different. And I think every time I kept on being like, well, I don't know if it's going to make it to the next round, but I think that I'm leaving it all on the table here. And so I felt good at every moment when I was writing it or when I was editing it, to be like, if this is the last one, okay, like I feel good about that.
Yeah, I think for me, my pitch didn't change too much. Like, I think the day I wrote the speech or I wrote the pitch, Trump did something idiotic. And so that was good motivation. And I think the day I wrote it, he had done something idiotic, because he gave us so much material. So I think the pitch and the story were relatively same, and any opportunity I could take to take a dig at that guy, I took it, honestly.
There was a lot of material coming out of that era. I want to ask you all about your writing processes. I really loved and kind of revisiting and reading your bios out loud tonight. I was really struck by the fact that for all of you, writing is a little bit of like a side hustle almost. Like, there's not a lot of the AAWW events we do. The writers are coming from traditional kind of MFA backgrounds into publishing a book. And that's not really true of any of you. And I'd love to just hear, like, how do you make space in your lives for your writing? How do you balance other jobs and being creative? I'd just love to hear tips too. I'm always struggling with that.
I'm happy to share it. One thing that I will say is that early on in my life, so like in high school and in college, I did really think about and focused and loved creative writing. So when I was in college, I actually was a creative writing minor. I thought that I was going to go into journalism. And when I was in college, there was a lot around kind of the collapse of kind of the newspapers. And it was a very real conversation with my family about how this was not a way to support myself. And so I ended up going into urban planning and looking at cities, which led me to this process around focusing on people, which was really kind of what journalism and kind of thinking about people's stories, it really is very, very connected. And so, I think that since then till now, I've always kept a journal. I've always written. It has always been a very, very private, solitary act. And I've gone into ebbs and flows of it, so that like there are times that I will be journaling consistently and writing consistently. I will have pieces on my computer that I share with no one. And then there are whole like years where I don't do a lot of writing. But I'll say that like a piece that has really helped with developing my practice has actually been meeting my now fiance, who is really, really, really focused on writing, not kind of, and it's also a side hustle for him. And so I think having someone that I care about deeply in my life to say that this is important, and it doesn't matter what the product is, but it matters that you make space for writing, kind of gives me that permission, like in my home life, in my routine, whatever it looks like, to actually just keep writing.
I love that.
Yeah, add to that you know, I've been writing since elementary school. I've had a passion for writing, whether it's poems or journal or short stories. And I did, you know, major in journalism in college, thinking I would go into sort of news reporting, those types of things. When I went to grad school, then things sort of turned around. I mean, writing's been a key part, I think, in no matter what career field you are in. I've been on a nonprofit board and done a lot of writing there, a lot of media work as well. And it's kind of surprising when you see folks who maybe don't have those writing abilities. I mean, writing is such an essential skill that needs to be practiced and tweaked on so many times, because it is kind of use it or lose it, I think, and try to do a lot of reading as well. I think reading helps the writing process immensely. I mean, just even reading the other stories in Untold, I'm like, wow, these are incredible. These are amazing stories, and so well written. But yeah, I think it'll always be part of my life. It's just a way to express. I want to do more writing. Last year, I took 2 screenwriting classes, just to sort of get a handle on what that process is like. And it's really about being able to share so many different types of stories in different ways. So I think writing for me will always be a form of expression as I continue on.
Yeah, I don't think I have too much to add. I'm not really the person to ask when it comes to balance. So you're probably way ahead of me, Lily. I'm just going to be honest. I don't know.
Which is helpful to recognize as well. I have just one more question. We are almost out of time, but actually, Anita, something you said about reading, being so vital to writing. I love to end events on a note of book recommendations, this idea of calling our kind of absent friends, you know, words and works that we love into the space. I'd love to do like a rapid fire round robin of just like, what's a book you read that you loved recently? Who is an author you admire? It could also be a journalist, you know, a filmmaker, just a creative person that you'd like to recommend to everyone on the call.
Sure. I read, well, years ago, I started reading Jhumpa Lahiri. I mean, I've read a lot of different things, but that's stuck out to me. Like Namesake was always something I really enjoyed, and then her other works. Just because at that time there wasn't a lot of female South Asian writers in that space, and yeah, I think that. But I did read The Alchemist not too long ago, and I'm late on that one. Everyone kept talking about it, so I picked it up more recently. But yeah, I think that's it.
I'll say, I mean, Anita, you mentioned The Alchemist. I'll add The Prophet. Khalil Gibran's The Prophet is an amazing book for me. It's just so lyrical in such a beautiful way. But I'll say also, I was actually going to mention, when I read Arundhati Roy's God of Small Things, it was, for me, it was a feeling that I had that gave me permission to really think about myself as a writer. I mean, I shared that, like, I read that when I was in high school, and then I really did kind of put a lot of my writing to the side, or was very private about it. And then now I'm a little bit more public. But I remember reading that and then slowly following her in kind of her own writing journey. And I've really respected the fact that she was able to leverage her ability to think about more political writing, and have really followed a lot of kind of how she's used her power and privilege to be able to shed light to a lot of that. But I also love the fact that, you know, the connection that I have is that she's trained as an architect, and she's talked about what it means to design a building and how that helped her design and shape novels, essays, and things like that. And it really resonates with me as an urban planner and thinking about space and place when she talks about her training as an architect and then as a writer. So definitely an affirmation around that. And then just also reading her stuff is like really joyful, even when it's political and when it's about a lot of atrocities. The way she writes is so joyful.
So I mean, I haven't read Dostoevsky or reread Dostoevsky in a while, but I think he really, you know, effectively fictionalizes the existential crisis. So I think in a lot of ways, he's an obvious choice. And if you were to ask something, so I haven't finished the book. In fact, I haven't gotten to page 3 yet, but I was recommended a book called Pale Fire by Nabokov. I know I'm saying his name wrong, but it was recommended by someone who is an excellent writer and is an absolute technician. And I read the first page and was completely intimidated and put it back. So my goal, one of my goals in life is to finish that book. So.
Amazing. Well, thank you all so much for your work, for these recommendations, for sharing and chatting with us. We have reached the end of this part of our event, but please do stick around because we're going to do an after party. There will be a cooking demonstration. I want to call Kamini and Gabrielle just really quickly back on screen to thank everyone together. And I have to thank our absolutely incredible ASL interpreters, Sarika, who's on screen now, and Shirley, who was on screen earlier. Huge thank you to both of you and to Pro Bono ASL, as always. Thank you. So yes, thank you everyone. Thank you to Brown Girl Magazine for partnering with us on this event. Again, we are going to transition now to kind of an after party. Please stick around. Khushboo Patel is going to show us how to make pistachio rosewater shortbread cookies dipped in chocolate, which look absolutely incredible. So please stick around and thank you all so much. Any final words, Kamini or Gabby?
Just thank you so much to AAWW for hosting this amazing conversation, all of the writers for joining on today and, you know, going deeper into the stories that you shared in the book. And for everybody who attended, thank you so much for giving us some time today and giving us a moment in your day. I'm so grateful for that.
Thank you all. And I see, I'm sorry, Gabby, go ahead.
I was just going to say the same. Thank you so much. And this was such a wonderful conversation. I love that we really got to talk about the writing process. I feel like sometimes a lot of our conversations are so focused on the stories because we've never had representation really like this before, a collection of stories talking about these experiences. But I'm so glad that they, you know, these writers had a chance to really talk about that process because without them, Untold would not even be possible. So thank you guys for having us and for facilitating this. And I'm super excited for the cooking demonstration.
Yes, definitely. Thank you all. So I'm just going to make sure that Khushboo is spotlit on the screen, and then we'll introduce her real quick. Khushboo Patel is a Dallas, Texas-based food blogger sharing fresh and seasonal recipes that are globally inspired with a modern twist. She is a full-time engineer and loves to experiment with the science and precision of cooking. You can check out all of her recipes at thesecondshiftblog.com. Please follow her on social media to just see how incredibly gorgeous and delicious everything looks. And my colleague T also just dropped the recipe that she is going to show us how to cook into the chat, so you can follow along, make these at home later. And Khushboo, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Lily, for that warm welcome and introduction. If you guys have any questions as we go through, feel free to put them in the chat box and I can answer them. So today we are going to be making pistachio rosewater cookies that are dipped in chocolate. So I've already prepared pretty much all the steps. So we're going to kind of talk through the recipe and I'll give you some tips and tricks along the way. So let's talk about ingredients first. So shortbread cookies are made with 5 main ingredients, which is butter, sugar, flour, salt, and vanilla extract. And then we have pistachio, rose water, and cardamom that we're going to flavor them with today. And if you don't like those flavors, don't worry, hang tight till the end. I'll share a couple of different ways that you can flavor these shortbread cookies to make them your own. So working with high quality ingredients is really important in baking because it tastes different. It changes the taste of it, and it also changes how it bakes. So some things will rise better if you're using quality ingredients. Some things will, it definitely affects the way it's baked. So first step is going to be taking out your butter. We're going to take this out for 3 to 4 hours so that it comes to room temp. That just depends on how cold your house is or your environment is, but 3 to 4 hours should be good. So once you have this at room temperature, you're going to take your stand mixer bowl and use the paddle attachment and cream the butter with our rose water and vanilla extract. You just want to do that for about a minute on low to medium speed, just to kind of get the creaminess of the butter and the sugar kind of infuses with the butter. So that's kind of what you're looking for. So just about a minute. And then you're going to take the remaining ingredients, the flour, sugar, the powdered sugar, the pistachio, cardamom, and rose water. Well, we already put the rose water in there. So you're going to take the remaining ingredients and put them in here and mix it on low to medium for 3 to 4 minutes. So you want to start out at a low speed until the flour kind of starts to be incorporated. Otherwise, the flour is going to go everywhere. And then you can increase it to medium when you start to see that happen. So here is what the dough is going to look like. It's like a little bit of big crumbs. And once you get to that consistency, that's when you'll stop. You will then form it into 2 discs. And then you can saran wrap these, plastic wrap them, and put them in the fridge for about an hour to chill. If you do not want to use cookie cutters to cut these, you can take your dough and form it into a long log, and then you can just slice them, and that's how you can bake them. So, but today we're going to do the cookie cutter version. So once the dough is chilled and it comes out, you're going to roll it out with flour. Just sprinkle a little bit of flour, roll it out. You want to get it to a quarter inch thickness, and then you'll use your cookie cutter to go ahead and cut the shapes. You can use a circle one, a heart one. This one is a scalloped one, but it's still a circle. And if you don't have a cookie cutter, don't be afraid to use something like a bowl and then just cut around it. I've done that before. And the important thing to know about this dough is once it's chilled and you roll it out, you want to roll it out, get all your shapes, then re-roll it out, and only do that twice. So after the second time, I tend to put it back in the fridge, and then I'll do a third one later, but it definitely changes the temperature. So you want to work pretty diligently when you do this step. Now our cookies are ready to go in the oven. You're going to bake them at 350 for 10 to 12 minutes. Just kind of keep an eye on them because mine take 11 minutes to bake, but sometimes ovens are different. Some people have, ovens that work way faster, and then the 10 minutes is sufficient. So just keep an eye out on them. You're just going to want to see that they kind of get a little bit golden on the bottom. Here we have some that are completely ready for us to decorate. And as you can see, it's important to roll that cookie dough to a quarter inch because these cookies won't rise. There's no egg in it. There's no baking agency in it. So it's not going to rise. So it's really important that we roll the cookie dough to the thickness we want. All right, to the fun part now is dipping them in chocolate, because who doesn't love that? So I usually use, here, I have it here. These Ghirardelli chocolate chips to melt. You can also use baking chocolate, or if you want to use dark chocolate, you can use that. This is milk chocolate, but these kind of melt in the microwave really quickly, and they keep a good shine on the chocolate. So I usually put it in the microwave for 30 seconds, mix it, put it in there for another 10, 15 seconds until it's fully melted. So take one of our cookies, Just generously dip it in the chocolate, kind of like that. And then we'll just add some garnishes on top. Some pistachios, and then some of these rose leaves. These rose leaves I got off of Amazon, so if you can't find them at your local tea store, that's a great place to look for them. And there you have it. So super simple. This cookie recipe is a really good one for beginners. I know a lot of people are intimidated by baking sometimes, so this is a really good one if you want to start out. And like I mentioned earlier, if you don't like these flavors, you can definitely swap out the rose water and add in lemon extract if you wanted to, and then put in like a tablespoon of lemon zest, and these would be really good lemon cookies. You can also add some strawberry powder to that and make it a strawberry lemon cookie. It's really, really good. Or you can just make it plain without any of the flavoring and then dip them in chocolate, put sprinkles on them, and they taste really great too. If anybody has any questions, they can DM me on Instagram if you want to. I'm happy to answer anything, or if you want to put questions in the chat box, you're more than welcome to. But with that, we're done.
That is amazing. You honestly just blew my mind a little bit by the idea of lemon extract and lemon zest cookies too. Would you put chocolate on them as well? Or something?
I have not put chocolate on them, but like that could probably taste good. I just know that when I make them with the lemon zest, the kitchen smells amazing. So
these are so incredibly beautiful. Thank you so much. I just reposted Khushboo's Instagram. Again, please do follow her. Check out all of the incredible bakes that she makes. And the recipe for these cookies, again, which are easy, we've been assured that amateur bakers can pull them off, is also in the chat. I don't think we have any questions. I did have one actually though, which is, do you have a preferred brand of Rosewater? What kind are you using?
So I got this at the local Asian market, and it's Quartus is what it's called.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah, and it's just rose water. If you don't have rose water, you can take these rose leaves and boil them for a while, and then you steep out the rose, and you want to add a little bit of sugar to it so that it kind of helps release the flavor. And then you can steep out the rose petals, and that'll also be rose water.
Incredible. Thank you so much. I think
You're
this
welcome.
is sort of the official end of our evening, the end of our event. Thank you again to everyone who joined us on this Thursday evening. It's a very warm evening in New York City. So thank you for hopping on Zoom with us. We're so grateful that you gathered with us. And thank you again to the Brown Girl Magazine team. Take care, everyone, and have a lovely evening.